I'll defend my own land, Frank shouts across the privet at the man in shalwar and t-shirt who's moved in next door. It's only a hedge. Isn't land a bit grand for your hanky-sized plot? Blood on the boil. I fought for this country, Frank cries as he falls. His gashed head lies wrapped in soft lint. Morphine eases the rage from his brow. Not knowing how to care for a bully, she brings new pyjamas, finest white cotton, blue piping, remembering that day when her mum bought him 2 for the price of 1, polyester, seconds from the market, a £5, and his temper sent static crackling between them that went on for a week. Did he think he was bettering himself, drawing in the cord, tied tight, an Englishman, 100% cotton? A buddleia grows where smoke once belched, as thousands swarm to the sound of the hooter 3 shifts a day. And alongside the crumbling chimney, a minaret rises, and men, loose-trousered, fill the close-packed streets, drawn by the call of the muezzin, hugging woolen coats against an autumn winter, while she, at his bedside, waits to offer nightwear, adapted from an ancient design of tailors in the markets of Karachi. Not sure if he knows pajama is an Urdu word.
The Migrations exhibition is really about objects and how they move, and in particular one type of object, the textile, and how portable it is. And the idea that maybe because of that movement and that portability, textiles carry more cultural references and multiple cultural references than other things in our material world. Textiles are the thing that people travel with when they don't even travel with anything else. They literally travel with the cloth on their back. So this exhibition tries to look at that. It does, of course, have a political component to that idea, but also to think about how the decorative, which is something that we can overlook and think of as slight or limited in what it's actually contributing to culture, can have a lot more information carried underneath it than maybe the first look would suggest. Mr. Somebody and Mr. Nobody are 2 South African designers. They're now based in the States as expats, but they were interested in trying to bring to a global audience a slightly different image of African design. Concerned that a lot of the headlines and the associations we have with the continent of Africa tend to be negative stories about the region's problems. They were interested in mixing some of those references, but also making sure that the world saw another version of the associations we have with that region, and one that shows how vibrant and eclectic and unusual its visual traditions are. So they borrowed the East African tradition of conga cloth or proverb cloths, which typically have imagery and text together. And they designed their own interpretations, contemporary interpretations of the conga cloth. The conga cloths that Mr. Somebody and Mr. Nobody produce are made in the States, in South Carolina, and some of them are also made in South Africa. The South African version was screen printed at a women's cooperative there. The versions that were made in South Carolina in the US were digitally printed. So we exhibit one piece in 2 versions, which maybe looks as though we've got a duplicate. But this is another example of a textile that's traveled. So again, the ways that these textiles move around the world from their production to their consumption is played out in these conga cloths.
started in 2006. It was a response to a ferry commute that I was taking from a town called Hythe over Southampton Water. And I was interested in the idea of embedding art and something visual within the 10 journey ticket that commuters were using. I quite like the idea that the artwork may not immediately be noticeable, that it could be contained in a pocket or in a purse, that it could move with passengers as they took the journey. There was a thinking around looms and weaving in its first rendition. I like that idea that through the ferry commute you were taking a journey along a pier train, taking a ferry, that there was a sort of a relationship with movement and weaving, the idea that people were making different patterns. And I like the notion of the ticket at that formative stage, that even when it was clipped, it was like it had a relationship with possibly dobby-cart looms, you know, that are clipped and they might, you know, indicate a different shaft being pulled down, which would be a different pattern. So even in its formative stage, I was very much thinking through textiles in terms of understanding how an artwork could function on the front of a ticket. I wasn't down at Southampton, so that meant that I had a sort of distance to the journey. But also it was captured in the textiles that I was wearing, because I was still wearing the same red coat. I still had the same jumper, I still had the same scarf. They had those kind of associations to the journey. So, you know, started sort of plucking those threads out and thinking, okay, my voice as a textile, coming from textile practice, could use textiles in some way, literally, to describe that journey, even though I wasn't sort of on the journey. The reason for the multiple was that I wanted it to make an association with something that was kind of quite practical as a cloth, or production of cloth, because I felt like there's a production element in a ticket. And I was interested in the fact that originally the work was produced over a number of years as a functioning ticket, and I still wanted that element of a production and a multiple. And the ticket still exists and it's still being used, so I just wanted to keep that alive in a sense. So by having that, it needed to get bigger to suggest that production. For me, I felt that was important.
Toril Johansen is a Norwegian artist, and she's created a series of work which are based on the wax resist tradition of textile production. She designed the fabric, playing with this idea of different ways of optical perception and different theories of optical perception, which she used in her design. She was interested in the very convoluted journey behind Dutch wax resist cloth, which we think originated in what we call present-day Indonesia, although lots of cultures lay claim to being the first place to have produced wax-resist cloth. When the Dutch were in the Spice Islands, what we call Indonesia today, they looked at the cloth and decided that they could mechanize the production and produce it in the Netherlands to sell back to the population of the Spice Islands. This didn't work. What happened instead was that the shipping routes the Dutch were taking along the West African coast resulted in trade occurring earlier on their journey down to what's present-day Indonesia. Over time, it meant that those cloths became associated with a lot of the independence movements in West and Central African nations, which is one of the reasons why Godfried Donker and his video of his late mother speaking about her textile collection is referring to the same type of cloth.
Yes, I can't tell no. Na ye nana no mfra ntoma. Nana dua bi wo wura mu ye frɛ ne kyɛnkyɛn. Ayesa ahoma ne bata dua bi ho. No wo mo bra ma ne ye tetrete. Ye tetrete pa na sebe ye nana mo de akata ye anim. Emma ni mema ni nyina. Ansa na abrofo beba. Abrofo beba no ene ye start say ye fra ntoma. Enti sa ntoma ye di kan ya ye de be kyerɛ mu.
The project Currency of Ntoma was a video piece I made about my mother's textile collection. She was very well known for collecting Dutch wax, which is mostly known as West African prints, but it's actually made in Holland and then shipped over to West Africa, and she was a trader in that. So I wanted to make a piece of her talking about her fabric collection almost like she was a collector.
Nti no, ye started say correct. Ye boa no, said ye be ya ehia wa utumi ton bi di twitwa ho.
The title of currency comes from various different layers of currency. Currency is a flow, it's a stream, currency is money. Currency is how information is disseminated.
They ton back on one, they ton fie. Me say me ton bi a me dia abo me dan so kra, me wie dan no si. Nti ntuma de ya de a Ghana for ma eboa no pa for here danti.
When a woman becomes a wife, or for the first time she's given cloth. When she becomes a mother, for the first time she's given cloth. And then she starts her collection. In terms of the men, I think men wear cloth as a classical, on classical traditional occasions. So it's a very, very different dynamic. It's not so much of a gender dynamic or a power dynamic as such. It's more of an aesthetic dynamics, I think. So I wanted to show the aesthetics of the men, how they wear cloth, but also talk about the kind of the theory behind the women collecting cloth. So the guy in the piece is called Nana Ntumafrahini. So that means that he's the royal dresser of the king of Ashanti. And his job is to show the king the different styles of how to wear the cloth. And so what I wanted to do was to have him demonstrate almost in slow motion, quite physically, the nature of how men wear cloth and how they use their bodies to balance the weight of the cloth. So you have 12 yards of cloth, but men wear either 8 yards, 10 yards or 12 yards of cloth by 4 yards. So it's 4 yards wide and 8 yards long. And the way that you wrap it around your body is not supposed to come loose. It's supposed to just be fixed there because of the way you've balanced it against your body.
Jasleen Kerr's work is called Dear Lord Robert Napier. We have a series of images that document the photo shoot, which resulted in a single image of a Sikh turban being tied by Jasleen's father around the current Lord Robert Napier. And the story behind this, which of course is what interests me across this exhibition, the stories behind the stories, is that Jasleen was a student at the Royal College of Art. Nearby, there was a statue of Lord Robert Napier's ancestor, who was very instrumental in British India. And one of the reasons why Jasleen's great-grandfather would have immigrated to the UK. And so she thought of trying to make that connection, a positive connection to migration and the roots that resulted in the colonial era, but this time speak about it as a positive aspect of her identity rather than maybe some of the more negative things that we see in the colonial era. So her father helped tie this turban round the current Lord Napier, who was agreeable to this plan, which was photographed. And the images we have in the series is, of course, the extraordinary length of the cloth that's used in the Sikh turban wrapped around this gentleman's head to result in a still image. An up-to-date version, you could say, or a contemporary reflection on that statue and what it means to British history and where this country is today. Dan Holter is a Zimbabwean artist who's based in South Africa, and we have a video piece for the Migrations exhibition called Space Invader. It's an aerial shot looking down on a group of people who are moving bags backwards and forwards. It was shot at the South African-Zimbabwean border. And we're looking at it with the same type of view that you might also see with CCTV footage. So it's got that camera angle, bird's eye view looking down on a region that's being policed and controlled. I'm interested, of course, because of the textile element in the bags that are used in this video. They're the same woven bags that you might associate with IKEA or with inexpensive, very large woven shopping bags that people often use to transport their goods, and in some cases the only goods that they have They've been called Ghana must go bags in Nigeria as part of a racist attack against a certain group of people living in the country in the past. They've also been used, quite unfortunately, in some catwalk exhibitions rather insensitively. So they have all of these connotations about movement and migration. They're also used by the French artist Françoise Dupré in this exhibition, where she collages them together.
Most of the materials are from these carry bag that you can buy in the markets. And I think what I found quite powerful about these carry bag, in particular the more traditional one, which has the woven type, is that you can find them in lots of different places, and they also are used in lots of different ways. So they could be used in Brixton Market. You might buy a smaller version of it because you forgot to take your shopping bag, and then you take away your bananas and your potatoes. Or you also, when you're traveling at the airport, when you're waiting for your bag, you also see these massive bags, and obviously these are to do with belongings. They're belongings that people are bringing back or bringing away from their home country. So they started feeding into my ideas of how textile is universal through our clothing, through stitching, but also culturally specific, and how we take these little kind of part of ourselves and our own identity through textiles. And those bags sort of became a way of engaging with that. And in particular with the stitch piece, it became about unstitching those bags and creating patterns and motif on the surface using other bags as well. And these motifs have come again from a really wide range of cultures. So there is a motif from Shetland Islands, from a knitting patterns, but there are also other architectural design that I'm interested in, particularly in ironwork, from St. Paul's Cathedral, for example. So it's kind of bringing lots of different kinds of visual elements that I'm interested in, and bringing them back and stitching them onto these bags. I realized as I was progressively using more textile material, I realized that this was an important context and a perfect context in which I could really engage with my own sense of belonging or unbelonging. And the idea that as a French-born artist living in London, I was part of this extraordinary cosmopolitan life. And I think this is extremely sophisticated when we've got this idea that migrants are these kind of poor trodden individuals and communities, and they have a real sense, we have a real sense of belonging to a really extraordinary network of culture and places.
We all wear clothing. It's something very familiar. So we're familiar with textiles. So I think that there's a kind of an accessibility when we work with textiles in a curatorial setting, so that people can come in and recognize themselves or begin to recognize their own stories because we're working with cloth. And I think that for me is the power of textiles in these settings. Coming into the migration show, one of the first things, yes, I noticed all the fabulous colour in the fabrics, but then I also noticed immediately the way that the cloth was moving. There was a slight breeze, and I noticed the way the cloth moved and felt, it's almost like a person moving there. So I think I noticed maybe a little bit more detail, but it's the textiles itself that bridges the gap between someone who perhaps doesn't go to galleries and comes here for the first time because of the topic of the show. I think there's a comfort in seeing textiles because we wear them against our bodies every day. I think exhibitions like this open up discussions. It opens the possibility of multivocality, if you like, so that things can be read at different levels. I do think that the whole field of textile cultures, if we can call it that, is opening up. And I think that that's a real feature of the field, that you can bring the everyday alongside academic debate, and the two things are not separate.